Superhero games, Spider-Man games, both things that go far back and have defined my childhood since I started gaming in 2005. But when it comes to the Insomniac PS4 Spider-Man games, I don't really understand why people gave this superhero game the crown over past Spider-Man games, and even the Batman Arkham games. In this video, I won't just be reviewing the game, but I'll be comparing it to past Spider-Man games and the best superhero franchise, the Arkham series. Call me whatever you want, but I'll be filling this video with damn near objective statements. Where do I even begin? Gameplay. Which is the thing that matters most, despite some people who put story over gameplay in a video game somehow. But anyway, out of all the superhero games I've played, Insomniacs Spiderman games has got to be the most cheese handed to you combat I have ever seen, not counting young kid superhero games like Spider-Man Friend or Foe or Lego games. There's so many ways to insta-kill enemies that it's not even funny. Or fun, for better words. Impact webs are an insta-kill, as you can send someone into a wall even if they're 5 or more meters away. He has a gadget where Spidey can essentially force push people off of buildings. But then we have his worst two moves. The various Spider-Man suits come with a unique power that you can swap onto other suits. But Web Blossom is undeniably the best one that can end crimes just by using it once off the bat. And this suit power is one you get at the very start of the game, unlike the Web of Shadows version of the move that isn't as powerful and is given much later around the second half of the game when harder enemies are introduced. There's plenty of suit powers in the game, but I and others never use them outside of a few niche circumstances because of Web Blossom. It's not even the only gadget he has that can end a crime instantly. Suspension Matrix into the Web Bomb. These two gadgets at least aren't given at the start, but you have this cheese to fall back on in combination with Web Blossom. This one can be spammed and can take out everyone in a 20-meter radius. It even works on the big thugs. It's quite comical how ridiculous it is. Whenever I use this move, I stop and wonder as to how this game got 9s as I sit there and watch them hover for a long ass time. Now, to give credit where it's due, the combat in itself is pretty solid at its core when not taking cheese into account, but I wouldn't put it on the tier of Arkham, Spider-Man 2, or Web of Shadows, which I'll delve into later. But what little fun there is in the combat doesn't last as soon as you figure out that you can just cheese the combat badly with special moves like Web Blossom and various gadgets. Gadget gameplay is so horribly unbalanced that you can pretty much easily go without throwing any punches most of the time. You know those special combo takedowns in Arkham where you press triangle and circle at once? Well, Spider-Man took that and just lets you do 2 in a row on top of those gadget insta-kills. The one place the combat collects itself is the Horde mode, where there's multiple waves of enemies coming in at once to the point where you'll exhaust the number of insta-kill gadgets you have and then actually end up having to throw a punch? God forbid. Relying on a Horde mode to get something out of the combat is still fairly sad. I'll admit that the DLCs of the game actually add a bit of challenge, with some enhanced enemies that aren't as easy to deal with, like some enhanced heavy thugs with a minigun. But even then, this thug only becomes a challenge because he defies the mechanics of the game by being immune to the cheese gadgets, which I honestly view as poor design in a way, as opposed to Arkham where no thug is really immune to a large portion of your gadgets, despite a move or two some enemies could avoid. But it's never your entire arsenal that gets avoided in Batman. Spider-Man is so fundamentally cheese that they basically have to do this gadget immunity thug to get a challenge out of the player. Until you figure out that it's the taser webs you have to rely on, but at least the taser webs aren't as easy as the other cheese gadgets in the game. Bosses are given this immunity as well to get a challenge. Not that the bosses are much better, as it usually comes down to shooting webs and then punching them. Rinse, wash, repeat in most of the boss fights, especially the Hammerhead boss fight, where I got bored with the cycle. There is honestly no rebuttal to this. Sure, I can hear someone say, but just don't use those moves. As much as that could work, I shouldn't have to pull my punches in a video game, especially when it's in a way where I'd have to ignore over half of the moves in the game. And don't send me any shitty shorts of these fancy non-optimal Spider-Man combos when the guy could have just ended him in one web blossom or impact web, or, oh, I almost forgot, the laser web trip mine. That's another insta-kill. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not one of those people who claim games have to be sweaty or that hard equals good. The Arkham games aren't hard to beat. Web of Shadows isn't hard either, as I've almost never died in that game at all. But in those games, there's nothing you could do that's as cheese. Even in other Spider-Man games that aren't as up there. Even the Amazing Spider-Man games. Hard doesn't equal good, but these Insomniacs Spider-Man games are way too far in the opposite direction of hard. Like, even inferior games like Gotham Knights and Avengers doesn't have as much cheesy insta-kills. If Spider-Man PS4 is a 9, then these two games become 7s. I've played a SpongeBob game less spammable than this, I'm not joking at all. Other categories of gameplay get even worse. Stealth. Now, I will admit the stealth takedowns in these Spider-Man games are pretty and cool to watch, but the actual mechanics, like the combat system itself, is also handed to you. You know, in the Arkham games, Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions noir segments, and even the Amazing Spider-Man games, where stealth exists, and you have to make the judgment call on if you can take this guy out without alerting others? Well, both of the PS4 Insomniac games, and perhaps its upcoming sequel, took it upon itself to take the fun of judgment away, and they just tell you if it's safe or unsafe to take out a thug. On top of impact webs still being effective at taking people out even in stealth. Batman Arkham doesn't have something that can easily insta-kill multiple thugs in stealth from multiple meters away, nor do other Spider-Man games that include stealth. Stealth is essentially not a challenge at all because of this crap, unless you include the challenge modes where you had to do it in a certain amount of time. The criticisms of stealth are even more obvious than the combat flaws. I really don't know how people look past this, but anyway, the stealth somehow gets even worse. Luckily, some people have already brought this up, so I won't spend too much time on it, but the segments where you play as a human version of Miles and fucking whiny, bitch-ass, downgraded face Mary Jane. This is honestly the worst impractical stealth I've ever seen, especially for the Mary Jane ones that are even longer and worse than Miles. With Miles, the segments are shorter and less goofy, as his are mostly over dire circumstances like looking for his dad during a terrorist attack, or getting medicine to help others suffering from a virus. This also works as a bit of foreshadowing on him becoming Spider-Man. That segment with Rhino was a fairly cool look into how scary the Rhino can be from a normal human's perspective. I still think being forced to play as a normal human is dumb in a Spider-Man game nonetheless. But with Mary Jane, it's even worse, as she doesn't have any of these reasons going for her at all. And her segments are even longer and more impractical. She sneaks into a criminal base, a military base, via knocking down toolboxes, where the thugs are too slow and stupid to check the other side of the table from where the toolbox was knocked over. Then Spider-Man gives MJ these spider sound transmitters that make sounds for 3 seconds when you throw them. They might as well be rocks with the way she just throws them. I guess Peter gave her a crap ton of them somehow, even though she doesn't have Batman's utility belt. But speaking of a crap ton, the stealth is horrible. So horrible that you could just keep throwing these things in front of the enemies and they'll never pick up on where they're being thrown from. Unlike the Arkham games where throwing a bunch of batarangs will let them know where you are in a few seconds. This stuff is even worse than the brain-dead Spider-Man stuff. Hell, on speedruns, you can apparently get away with just running past people. Once again, I'll ask, how did this game get 9s? I mentioned SpongeBob already, but I'm about to mention another kid's game. When I was 5, I played this Madagascar game. It was my first game ever, and I swear to God, the stealth of sneaking around as a zebra was more practical than knocking down toolboxes. But anyway, speaking of how annoying Insomniac's Mary Jane was, let's tackle story before I get to web swinging. I'm not going to spend too much time on this as I'd rather focus on gameplay as that's what matters most. Especially under the context that I don't think the story in this game is super duper great in comparison to the stories of other games, like Red Dead Redemption that delves into the lost values caused by modernization, Metal Gear Revengeance that tackles the topic of having to break the rules and laws for the greater good, along with past Spider-Man games and Arkham games I'll delve into later in this video. Insomniacs Spiderman, despite not being on that level, is still pretty solid as we get the standard story of heroic sacrifice that comes with being Spider-Man in combination with a great Doc Ock arc where Otto Octavius loses himself due to obstacles like Norman Osborn getting in his way of doing a good thing. I can positively say that this is my favorite Doc Ock adaptation apart from Sam Raimi's. Martin Lee's similar arc of somewhat literally fighting a demon inside is also interesting, and other Sinister Six members are given a good bit of alluded depth despite their limited screen time and role in the story. Although I don't really dig the tech direction they took with a blunt brute like Rhino. Vulture did the tech direction better in Web of Shadows. But now we get to the cons. This game has the worst written female characters I have ever seen, and that's me saying this after having watched all of She-Hulk. This is once again something that some people have pointed out, and once again it caused me to wonder how this game got 9s. If MJ was bad from a gameplay perspective and a story perspective. Let's try and fail to briefly get into it. Mary Jane broke up with Peter earlier because she felt like she was being babied by him, apparently, and she doubles down on this when she whines about Peter swinging and saving her after she was endangering herself for info by sneaking into a Sable military base with no special martial arts training, and Spider-Man is apparently in the wrong, with goofy as fuck examples like that. I have never heard a female character bitch about being saved when she probably needed it. I wasn't joking earlier. None of She-Hulk's moments are as bad as this shit. I'd rather see a woman twerk, as they tend to do a lot of these days, than hear her bitch at a cop or superhero after being saved. She-Hulk's moments of dislikability were at least realistically bad. Full video on that, by the way. Speaking of Mary Jane and realistic behaviors, Raimi's Mary Jane is way better than this shit, despite what all those cuck YouTubers like Cosmonaut told you to think, because you failed to think for yourself, just like the time you bought into this game being a 9. Raimi's MJ got bashed for unlikable behaviors, but those were under reasonable context, like Spider-Man low-key cheating slightly by kissing another girl in front of her, etc. Not whining about being saved despite her being saved in all 3 films. Once again, I have a video on that made by a good friend that I'll put at the end screen. Her character is also a shameless Lois Lane knockoff now, who took Peter's Daily Bugle job. Straying from the source material is one thing I don't mind, but straying from the source material only to rip off something else is quite pathetic. I don't care about her being based upon the Ultimate Comics. That shit doesn't hold up when most of the characters in this game aren't based upon their Ultimate Comics form, as Spider-Man isn't in high school, like he is in those comics. Don't be one of those cucks who just pick and choose when comic book accuracy matters, when you bash Snyder's movies for it, and then love the bunch of dumb MCU movies that strayed even further. MJ apparently saves Spider-Man by hitting some thug when Spidey is at gunpoint, as if that matters to someone who dodges lightning. MJ saves Spider-Man from a fire cause she's apparently better than a firefighter now. Insomniac's MJ is horrible, and I'll get to her ugly, deliberately downgraded face later. But now, I'll get to the other girls. Silver Sable in relation to Spider-Man. This game also suffers a bit of what shows like Loki and Boba Fett suffer from. Emasculated main character syndrome. Silver Sable folds this nigga throughout the game. This basic human bitch with only 2 pistols, who we're barely told anything about, folds Spider-Man and has him begging to not fight and work together, as if I haven't been fighting multiple gunmen throughout the entirety of this overrated game. Silver Sable did better than Taskmaster did. Taskmaster being a guy who mimics the movements and fighting styles of his opponents nearly perfectly, and has also studied Spider-Man throughout the game, and he didn't do as good as Silver Sable. I can see people scattering like cocks to think of an excuse. But Black Cat fights him. Black Cat never wins or comes close to a standstill. She barely even fights him. Her goal is to run away and use tricks to help her do so, as Spider-Man doesn't go all out since Black Cat is a thief, not a murderer or someone who endangers others. Some will point to the Punisher fighting him, and to be honest, I call that bullshit too. But Sable doing it just reeks of what I'm going to assume is feminist pandering. Just like the pandering that went into them deliberately making Mary Jane's face uglier than the woman doing the motion capture. Don't get me started on the upcoming sequel that tripled down on this. Cuck devs just like MK, Gotham Knights, and the many other games that do that shit. Black Cat, of course, gets to be pretty enough because she's not the girl that Peter gets with. Black Cat isn't as atrociously written. She's sort of written like the standard Western woman in a way, as she lies and strings Spider-Man along by telling him that she has a son that may be his, even though she doesn't have one at all. Dislikable, but similar to She-Hulk, it's realistic, I guess. She is partially a villain. She even does those bad things that Western women do when they do something wrong and they half-assingly try to be nice later to make up for it. When Black Cat helps Spider-Man and gives him a drive that'll help him take out the goofily cyborg-made Hammerhead. How the hell can he even enjoy the mob life like this? Gosh, what an odd storyline. Black Cat was handled way better in Spider-Man 2's game though, which I'll delve into later. Yuri is the only female character I don't have a problem with. A cop trying to deal with the bad guys and begins to play less by the book or not by the book at all when faced with too much loss that the job brings. Only 1 or 2 good female characters out of 4. All this crap takes the story down a few pegs. Hell, it even takes the gameplay down a few pegs, as Mary Jane takes up a significant amount of time in the game where you're forced to play as her. No one loved these MJ segments. Anyone who says otherwise is lying, especially when you're forced to do it on a second playthrough. Who thought it was a good idea to have you play as a normal human in a Spider-Man game? I'll delve into playable characters later in the Arkham and Retro Spider-Man segment, etc. But now, we'll finish off the gameplay with one of the most important things in a Spider-Man game, the swing. Just like the gameplay I've covered, hand it to you. It may look cinematic and cool, but it takes no skill and does everything for you. Auto wall running, when in past Spider-Man games it would take a separate button to do, which gave it a skill ceiling. When you hold right trigger to initiate a web swing, but you don't let go of the right trigger, the game will automatically let go of the swing for you and have Spider-Man do a jump. Which therefore means you can pretty much just move the analog stick forward and hold the right trigger down without ever letting go of it And it'll do everything. You will traverse the entire city just doing that. You'll automatically wall run with that same button and jump over everything, etc. just by doing that. The game stops you from failing. It has no skill gap unless you count the swinging races, but even then, those are pretty easy. On top of all of this, it's objectively slower than the PS3's and Xbox 360's Spider-Man Web of Shadows, and the PS2's and original Xbox's Spider-Man 2. I know I pissed off the Spider-Man PS4 drones with this video, but that is objectively a fact, among other things I've said. With everything I've delved into, that's pretty much objective. I don't really see how this game is held to such high esteem. It has to be a bandwagon and hive caused by marketing in tandem with being the only Spider-Man game playable on current hardware. A lot of the people who disagree probably never played the older ones or just got deceived by what a bunch of shitty YouTubers told them. Don't even get me started on those shitty puzzles everyone skips. You should never have something so questionable that a skip option exists. Like, what the hell? But anyway, the only pros this Spider-Man game has over the past is just cinematics, graphics, and skins. I'll give them credit for skins, but skins aren't a winning factor for a game when the core mechanics aren't as good as past games, or general games. Don't mention photo mode either, that's not a winning factor despite the cool Instagram posts I've seen. But as promised, let's briefly delve into what I find superior. The past Spider-Man games. Web of Shadows had combat at multiple levels. The ground, the walls, and the air. I will admit Web of Shadows isn't hard, as I've rarely died in it, but you can't insta-clear enemies like you can in the PS4 games I've already delved into. Hell, you can't do that in any other Spider-Man game, even the ones that aren't heavy hitters like Web of Shadows and Spider-Man 2. As said before, swinging is objectively faster and takes skill via advanced text and movements and the possibility of failure if you are not good at the game. Who'd think? You have to press a button to wall run instead of the game doing it for you. Graphics aside, the animations are prettier, I swear. It feels more comic booky mixed with flashy anime, which is great at portraying Spider-Man's speed as opposed to him being held by Silver Sable's pistols. The story of Web of Shadows is a standard symbiote story, but with higher stakes as the city is in danger. Can Spider-Man overcome this dark addiction or succumb to it via moments where you get to choose? Spider-Man wants to turn back the darkness without losing himself to it. I know people ranted about the voice acting, but I didn't really have a huge problem with it. Not as much as PS4 Mary Jane as a character. Oh right, women got to be sexy in this game. Black Cat got her standard, chest window. Mary Jane looks fine for Xbox 360 graphics. The concept art shows their intent, as opposed to the PS4 game and their soy progressive MK11 woke pandering where they make women uglier on purpose, as brought up before. Let's compare video game MJ, shall we? Web of Shadows MJ rants at Peter for logical reasons. She's mad that he's using the black suit as it's alluded that he wore it before and got rid of it. She cares for his greater good. It's a reasonable reason for her to be mad as opposed to what I've already delved into with PS4 MJ, where she bitches about being saved from sneaking into military bases. Big difference. MJ in Web of Shadows has a gameplay segment, sorta. In this badass mission where love interests cross paths and Spider-Man has to fight a symbiote-infected Black Cat on top of a bunch of symbiotes. Mary Jane, with a shotgun accompanied by shields, swoops in to help Spider-Man, and you get this badass segment where you have to fight Black Cat as you defend Mary Jane from the symbiotes as she blasts a few of them away with a shotgun as opposed to pushing toolboxes and throwing spider rocks in the worst stealth ever. Case in point, your hive argument is invalid. Spider-Man 2 for similar reasons to Web of Shadows, more advanced skill gap swinging and faster swinging speeds. Spider-Man 2 actually has solid, very solid superhero difficulty in comparison to other superhero games, even the Arkham games, but especially in comparison to the PS4 games that are the polar opposite. The PS4 games are just cinematics over substance. Look no further than the fact that you don't really get to fight the Sinister Six. It's just a cutscene, and then two of them at once at best, as opposed to Spider-Man 2, which gave an insane challenge mode where you got to fight 4 bosses: Rhino, Doc Ock, Shocker, and a scrapped boss known as Kraven's girl, Calypso. I died tons of times when fighting the 4. Story is great as it's of course based on a very high tier movie. Black Cat in the game was amazing. Her contribution to the story was spectacular as she tries to loosen Spider-Man from his responsibility so he could have fun, but Spider-Man has to do what he has to do because with great power comes great responsibility. Black Cat's story contribution is my favorite here, and is superior to her sort of just being a low-key bitchy liar in the PS4 game. Spider-Man doesn't get folded easily in these games, luckily, unlike Spider-Man PS4. As I wrap up this retro Spider-Man segment, I have to say, I don't really see how the PS4 games demolish any of the past Spider-Man games, except the Amazing Spider-Man 2, I guess. The Amazing Spider-Man 1 had a news reporter character like Mary Jane, except she wasn't Mary Jane, which means they didn't 180 a character for no reason. Whitney Chang, she sneaks into places too, but by more practical means, such as using a disguise instead of knocking down toolboxes and throwing spider rocks. I guess PS4 includes stealth where Web of Shadows and Spider-Man 2 does not, but I'd rather have it be completely gone if it's not handled that well in the first place. Shattered Dimensions and Edge of Time are linear Spider-Man games, so it doesn't warrant comparison, although I'd say they're better at being linear Spider-Man games than the PS4 one is at being a general game. Those Beanox games didn't slouch on their skins, such as 2099 and Noir looking better in those older games than the PS4 ones anyway. Oh right, and a bunch of these Spider-Man games had playable characters that weren't lame human token inserts. Web of Shadows counts as 2 characters, but beyond that, they had Green Goblin and New Goblin, Scorpion, Rhino, and the Lizard. The Lizard DLC went hard, but anyway. Spider-Man PS4 didn't really do that unless you count Miles, MJ, and their shitty human stealth segments. I'm not saying playable characters have to be a thing, as Spider-Man 2 never had any additional playable characters, but here's where I pull a Dwayne Johnson and raise my eyebrow. Spider-Man PS4 had DLC, which I think therefore justifies the request of another playable character, like Black Cat, which they should have done like an actual great video game did. Speaking of an actual great fairly rated superhero game, let's get on to Arkham before I wrap this up. You can be a cuck and point at sales as if it matters at measuring quality, but I don't see how some people claim Spider-Man PS4 beats Arkham at nearly any category. Combat and stealth are cheesier than Arkham by a landslide, as I've already delved into earlier, on top of the fact that Arkham has an insane amount of competitive replay value through their challenge mode, since their combat isn't an autistic cheese joke. Arkham games aren't hard to not die in for the most part, but they aren't cheese, and their difficulty comes with perfecting the combat flawlessly. Trust me, I know, as I have a few great scores on the Arkham games leaderboards. I ain't no scrub. But yeah, stealth is harder and the AI isn't as brain dead as Spider-Man's, and they'll adapt to what Batman does in various ways, such as destroying gargoyles he hangs himself on, or checking and looking all around spots where he takes people out, etc. Remember what I said about playable characters? Well, Arkham games have tons of them as DLC in their game, or even within the game's base game of Arkham Knight, unlike Spider-Man, and that's in every Batman Arkham game since Arkham Asylum. Don't even get me started on the long-lost multiplayer of the slept-on Batman Arkham Origins. If Spider-Man can't even put a decent amount of challenge into a single player, God knows they'll never innovate and do a multiplayer with its scrub fanbase. Then we have story, which I'll be very brief with since I already have other videos on it and this is a Spider-Man video. Short point though, they ain't got shit on Batman narrative-wise. Arkham Origins delves into the concept of fate that all gets encountered by the concept of one bad day. Loose sequel to the critically acclaimed Killing Joke basically. I personally don't view any of the other Arkham games on the level of Arkham Origins' story. You could bite me on that, Arkham drones who listen to YouTube takes, but anyway. None of these Arkham games have atrocious moments and characters, unlike Insomniac's MJ. They don't have Batman getting folded by Catwoman as opposed to a man with superpowers getting folded by a normal human woman. This woke emasculating shit honestly has me worried for that upcoming Wolverine game, but anyway. The only thing the Insomniacs Spiderman games have over Arkham is swinging around the city being a more fun experience than just gliding around it, as free roaming in Arkham games without side missions to do is pretty dull. Which is where its challenge mode comes in as said before. But it's still a one-up Spider-Man has over it nonetheless. But even then, that's something that other Spider-Man games have over it as well. If not nearly every free roam web swinging game except for the watered down swinging from the Amazing Spider-Man games. It's too bad you can't play any of the older Marvel games on current hardware as I've ranted about before. Maybe this bandwagon wouldn't be as bad if people could play those older games instead of going off of what marketing and shitty YouTubers tell them. Similar issue with them not porting the older God of Wars, but anyway. I know I may have sounded harsh on this game, but it's really due to this game being called a 9 despite a lot of these cons that tread the territory of being objective problems. Like, I know I've said it doesn't deserve 9s many times, but let me use my Giga Independent, Supreme Intelligent Mind to define what 9 means, aka 90%, like a school grade. A 9 or a 90% or anything higher tends to mean something that was so good that it went without any significant flaw, as it does things in an amazing fashion. But all these cons of mine seem to debunk such a number. Some of what I've said are things that other people have already stated, like the MJ missions, and it still got 9s. Because that's the trend, I guess. It's the only thing I could think of. If I were to try to put myself in their shoes, the only 9 out of 10 perspective I could imagine is someone who doesn't like challenge in the slightest, without any margin for error. A man who's oblivious to the socialist shit happening in the world around him, and is completely uncritical or complacent. As condescending as it sounds, Spider-Man for Dummies. The combat works in a few moments like the Horde mode and DLC as I mentioned before, along with cinematics being cool to look at, but I can only see it possibly being better than the weaker Spider-Man free roam games, but not Web of Shadows, not Spider-Man 2, as I've delved into, hell, not even Spider-Man 3, and definitely not Arkham despite the game taking various elements from the Arkham games like that Scorpion segment that was fairly solid. Overall, I view the Insomniacs Spiderman games as a 7 at best, and if I'm really critical, I could even go as low as 6. Although I still view them positively enough to be worth finishing and buying a PS4 and PS5 for, admittedly, but anyway, I actually view Miles Morales' game more positively, but I'm going to make that a part 2 of this video, and then we'll see if the second game for the PS5 improves anything, which I doubt it drastically will, despite some improvements like swing speed. But thanks for watching this long as hell video of mine. Check out these cool videos in my end screen, or look for my socials like Instagram and Discord in the description. Feel free to applaud or challenge me in the comments. You won't win though, no one ever does. But anyway, thanks for watching.